Okay, most people hold iOS as the gold standard when it comes to providing a seamless software experience with almost no issues. And for the most part, it's kinda true. iOS is very stable and you'll almost never encounter compatibility issues if you're sticking within its ecosystem. But just like any platform, iOS isn't perfect. And just like how I went over 7 things wrong with Android, which I'll leave in the cards, I'll also go over 7 things wrong with iOS. And all of these things are based on personal experience and common complaints that I've seen from other iOS users on the internet. And don't worry, this video isn't about bashing iOS. Think of it more like feedback, where I go over things that I'd love to see fixed or improved, as well as some bad habits that I've noticed. So drop a thumbs up if you agree with any points that I make in this video, and let's start it off with the first big thing that's wrong with iOS. Multitasking. Yeah, it's pretty bad. First off, if you're using an iPhone, there's no real way to use more than one app at a time, and that can get really annoying. For example, if you're in class trying to take notes while doing some quick calculations, or instead you're attending a virtual meeting and need to research at the same time, you're stuck with constantly switching between apps and doing all these extra gestures. On Android, you have the convenience of using split screen to have 2 apps open at the same time and to get these tasks done a lot quicker and easier. Some phones like those from Samsung, OnePlus, and Oppo even let you open apps in floating resizable windows. To top it off, iOS doesn't let apps overlay any objects over the screen. And this is a huge miss for multitaskers because on Android, you can do this, and some developers have created some really astonishing ways to launch activities, toggle system settings, access your favorite apps and contacts, and a lot more without ever needing to leave your current screen. It's super convenient. To top it off, if you're downloading something within an app, like maybe you're downloading offline maps, you'll need to stay within that app because if you leave, the download speed could slow to a crawl. And there's no live notification on top of that to show you the progress, unlike Android where you can see the percentage. To be real, picture-in-picture is the only real multitasking feature on iOS, and it only works for videos, not something like navigation, which is super useful on Android. The second big thing that's wrong with iOS is the back gesture. It's all over the place. Sometimes you swipe down to go back, sometimes it's left or right, and other times there's a back button in the top left corner. It gets confusing, especially if you're trying to use the phone with one hand and need to switch sides. On Android, the back gesture is universal and it works the same way no matter where you are, and you can swipe from either edge of the screen to go back. Plus, there's usually an arrow to make it super clear that you are going back. Apple needs to take note and make their back gesture a lot more universal. It's about time. The third issue with iOS is that Apple seriously limits what apps can do. For instance, they only allow a handful of default apps to be swapped out, and even when you do, those third-party alternatives are still sandboxed, meaning that they can't really make deep system level changes. And forget about switching to Launcher, Digital Assistant, or Wallet app like you can on Android. It's not happening. Another annoying thing is that Apple makes it difficult to clear an app's data or cache. There's no universal way to do it unless you uninstall the app. Sure, Apple does give developers the option to add a reset button inside their app, but you can't globally clear app data from the system settings. On Android, it's a breeze. You just hop into the app's info page and clear its data right then and there. Apple also makes it extremely difficult to install apps outside the App Store. I mean, sure there are some workarounds like using some third-party app stores to sideload apps, but Apple also restricts those too. Like they only let you install 3 apps at a time, and those apps also expire after 7 days unless you refresh them in that app store. It's even taken the European Union to force Apple to fully support third-party app stores, but Apple also found a workaround where they just support those app stores only in Europe, nowhere else, even if you use a VPN. The other alternatives are to use TestFlight if the app's developer gives you access, or even just to jailbreak your iPhone, but you can't just head into the browser and start downloading third-party apps like you can on Android. And I get why Apple does this. They want to keep things secure and make sure you don't accidentally install malware. But on Android, having the freedom to install apps outside the Play Store has actually been a game changer. We've gotten more open source alternatives that are free, packed with cool tools, and offer stuff that you can't always find on the Play Store. Plus, Androids now have a security tool called Google Play Protect, which automatically scans and monitors any apps you download inside or even outside the Play Store, and it will pick up on any strange and suspicious activity. Plus, there are even third-party app stores like F-Droid, which lets you download free and open source apps that are generally safe to use since each app is checked for malware and security risks before they're added to the repository. And here's another use case. If you update an app and you end up starting to get new issues because of a new bug, you can easily find an older version on sites like APK Mirror and roll back to the stable version from before. So that's actually really useful. And then there's the fact that Apple restricts app developers from accessing certain features. For example, like I said before, apps can't overlay objects over other apps, and they also can't really modify system settings, and a few more things. Sure, this is all for security, but it makes iOS feel pretty restrictive and honestly pretty boring. If Apple loosened the reins just a little, we'd see some pretty crazy innovations from developers. Now, keeping my devices powered on the go is a big deal for me, but finding the right power bank has always been tricky. Most are either too bulky or don't have enough juice. That changed when EcoFlow, the sponsor of this video, introduced me to their Rapid Magnetic Power Bank. It's compact, sleek, and packs a 5,000 mAh capacity. They even have a 10,000 mAh version that's still surprisingly portable. What makes it stand out? First, it has a built-in kickstand so you can prop up your phone while charging. There's also a digital display that shows you the battery level, and when it comes to charging, it's fast. The Rapid is Key 2 certified for 15-watt wireless charging, so you can juice up an iPhone 15 Pro to 50% in about 40 minutes. It also has a built-in USB-C cable for up to 30-watt charging, cutting that time down to just 25 minutes. No extra cables needed. And the USB-C cable is bidirectional, so you can charge the power bank itself at 65 watts and go from 0 to 70% in just 33 minutes. It's pretty insane. You can even charge two devices at once, like your phone and earbuds. And when I'm really going off the grid, EcoFlow's Power Hat is the ultimate backup. I've actually never seen anything like this. It's a solar charger hat that can fully charge most phones as fast as 3 to 4 hours. Plus, it even has dual ports, so you can charge two devices simultaneously. It's also foldable, waterproof, dustproof, and can give you UPF 50+ sun protection. I'm never going camping or hiking without it ever again. So whether you're commuting or exploring, EcoFlow's Rapid Magnetic Power Bank and Power Hat have you covered. I'll leave the product links at the top of the description. Okay, the fourth issue with iOS is that Apple just does things that don't make sense. For example, some settings for the camera app are not found in the actual camera app. Nope, you have to dig in the system settings first, and then you'll find some extra options in there. The same goes for other apps like Safari. It's confusing because you never know if the setting you need is inside the app or buried in the system settings. Another head scratcher is the control center in iOS 18. The first page is fine, but when you swipe to the second, it just gives you an expanded music player that was already reachable on the first page. Then swipe again and you get the same system toggles as the first page. Why is it so repetitive? Then there's the new Photos app layout, which is just chaotic. Everything's crammed onto one page, making it overwhelming, confusing, and kind of hard to find some features. I mean, it's an upgrade that feels like a downgrade. And as much as I love that Apple finally lets us customize icons and widget colors on the home screen, let's be honest, they look pretty awful. The colors are muted and dark, and when you tint them, no matter what you do, the icons stay dark, even if you have the system light theme turned on. Normally, Apple nails the design, but this is a mess. The fifth issue that always bugs me about iOS is the lack of customization. I get it, some people don't want an overcomplicated OS with hundreds of settings, but come on, even a minimalistic software experience could use a little bit more flexibility without going full Samsung One UI. For example, it would be awesome if Apple lets us change the layout of the home screen. We can add more icons to each screen and reduce the need for a bunch of folders. And in the app library, being able to rename folders, rearrange apps, or create custom categories would also make the whole thing feel more intuitive and personal. Also, custom gestures would also be a game changer. Imagine doing a 3-finger swipe down to take a screenshot, or drawing a letter to open an app, Or better yet, swiping left or right on the dynamic island to switch tracks, or double tapping it to pause a timer when there's only one task running in the background. For the iPhone 16, how about letting the camera control button do a lot more than just launch and control the camera? Imagine if this button could just adjust the phone's brightness or volume when watching videos, or even act as a shortcut for other apps you frequently use. Hell, even just letting us customize the double tap action for the power key would be enough. We don't all use Apple Pay. Apple. Plus, I know from a marketing standpoint this would be bad, but a customizable power key would even eliminate the need for the action button and quite possibly the camera control button if they equip the power key with capacitive touch and pressure sensitive capabilities. That's just scratching the surface of all the things Apple could do to give users more control and make the OS feel more personal. The sixth thing Apple needs to improve is the keyboard. It's one of the most commonly complained about features, and for good reason. Since iOS doesn't allow third-party keyboards to integrate fully with the system, you're stuck with Apple's basic keyboard, which has a few major flaws. First, autocorrect can be a nightmare. You'll type a word, hit send, and then Apple could decide that it knows better and ends up changing it at the last second. Sometimes it even changes the word completely and messes up what you were trying to say in the first place. It's pretty frustrating. On Android, Google's keyboard doesn't do that. It leaves the word as is even if you misspelled it. Then there's the lack of a number row on the front page. Most other keyboards have it, or allow you to have it, but Apple doesn't. Plus, the keyboard itself is pretty plain and featureless. On Android, Gboard lets you search for GIFs, stickers, access clipboard history, translate what you type, and so much more. Apple's keyboard feels stuck in the past. And the last thing I don't like about iOS is how restrictive it is. I get that Apple doesn't want to turn iOS into an Android clone with tons of customizable settings, but sometimes the restrictions go too far, even making it hard for users when they interact with other devices outside of Apple's ecosystem. For instance, trying to interact with anyone who doesn't have an iPhone or a Mac is a nightmare. FaceTime calls to Android users have horrible quality and barely any features. Transferring files between different platforms is almost impossible without a third-party app. And even though Apple finally supports RCS messaging, it's a half-baked implementation without end-to-end encryption. So hackers can end up reading your conversations, and Android users are still stuck with those ugly green bubbles and no fun exclusive iMessage features. And there are a few other things, like file management is terrible. Apple pretty much hides away the entire file system, making it hard to manage anything outside of your downloads and photos. And if you're trying to connect a non-Apple smartwatch or earbuds to an iPhone, you're most likely going to miss out on most of the features that are usually supported on Android. Anyway, that's my list. If you want to see the other side and learn about 7 things that are wrong with Android, tap on this video. Thanks for sticking around. Drop a thumbs up if you agree with any of these points. Hit the subscribe button with the notification bell turned on so that you don't miss out on any future videos, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Kapow!